The next step in this assignment is to begin creating the 6 variables that are our ratios that we're going to use to analyze our industry. The first variable that we're asked to collect, the first ratio we're asked to create is net profit margin, defined as net income divided by total revenue. I'm going to define my variable here in cell P1 and give it a short abbreviation, NPM, for net profit margin. To tell Excel to do a calculation, I'm going to do the equal sign, select my numerator, net income, cell K2, divided by revenue, which is in column L. And so I'm going to select L2. I know during the financial analysis project number 1, some students were using their calculators to calculate some of the ratio variables. That was fine, reasonably fine, when we only had a few ratios to calculate. But you can see here in my industry, I have 231 observations. I would not want to be doing 230 times 6 variables on my calculator and plugging those numbers in. We really want Excel to do the work for us. So I have my answer here for this first observation. The net profit margin is 0.1%. Very, very low. Now, I don't want to have to solve that. I type in that formula for every single row below here. So what I can do is go to my cell, hover my cursor in the bottom right corner so that I see the black plus sign, and I'm going to double left click. And when I do that, the values fill in all the way down to my very last variable down at the bottom. The next ratio that I'm asked to create is earnings per share. Obviously, I'm going to abbreviate that, EPS. I need to know what is my formula for earnings per share. Of course, I know that. We've been tested on that. Or actually, we will be tested on that coming up. So I need to, my numerator of earnings per share is net income minus preferred dividends. My denominator is number of shares outstanding. I need to tell Excel to calculate net income less preferred dividends before dividing that whole term in the numerator by the denominator. Therefore, I need to have a parentheses to show Excel how to do the order of operations. Net income minus preferred dividends. And again, if you're wondering how I know what these dividend names are, they're defined in my instruction sheet, which I have printed out sitting next to me. Now I have my numerator. That's divided by number of common shares outstanding. Select cell G2, enter. Earnings per share were about 6 cents. I hover over the bottom right corner till my cursor becomes a black plus sign, and I double left click to have that information filled down. Now, when you look at these numbers, you're probably thinking, for example, in column E, we have total current assets. They're not $45. All of the information here is in millions of dollars. Okay, my next ratio is ROA. ROA is equal to net income divided by total assets. The current ratio is equal to current assets divided by current liabilities. As I go through this, I like to ask myself, what are these numbers that I've just calculated now? Obviously not for all 231 observations, but for the first one, what does the current ratio of 2.88 mean? It means that there's almost 3 times as many assets in current assets than there are current liabilities. In terms of liquidity, we'd like to see a company have a current ratio about or greater than 1.0. So we can say that this observation here in 2010 for this company, Monarch Cement Company, is very, very liquid. Oh, it seems I missed ROE. So I am going to insert a column to get that there. If you're curious how to insert the column, I hover over this heading here with the black arrow, left click, I right click, choose insert, and I put in my ROE. Maybe you notice that and you put your ROE in the correct place. ROE is net income divided by total stockholders' equity. Current ratio I've done. And my last ratio is my liabilities to assets ratio. This compares my total liabilities to total assets to look as a measure of solvency. What does this say? Liabilities are about, or the assets are financed by liability. For about 42% of the total assets are financed with liabilities. What else are those assets financed with? I hope you were thinking equity. Those are the two ways to finance assets, liabilities or equity. Okay, now my ratios have been created. This is the data that I want to then be able to analyze. Before I begin my ratio analysis, I have a question. How did this industry do? How did it perform? How was the industry overall in terms of size over the period 2010 to 2018? So before I begin my ratio analysis, the next step is going to be to answer these questions. How was net income for this entire industry over the period? And how are total assets? Was the industry growing or was it shrinking? Was net income improving? Was it decreasing or was it variable over this period? In order to do that, I'm going to look at aggregate or total values by year of the variables net income and total assets. To do this, I want to create a new worksheet. So I'm scroll down here, down to the bottom, click on the plus sign for new sheet. I'm going to rename it, right click to rename. And I'm going to rename this worksheet totals. And I could do totals for I could look at how stockholders' equity, how liabilities have changed. I'm going to do 2. I'm going to ask you to do 2, but feel free to do more on your own if you're curious to see how did this company change, how did this industry change over time? How did total revenues change? How did, we can even do this on total, well, we can't do on totals on the ratios. How did total stockholders' equities change? How did total liabilities change? All right, so we want the following variables: year, total assets, and net income. I can do this one of 2 ways. I can select one at a time. And how do I select a column? I hover over the letter of the column, B, until my cursor becomes a black arrow, and I left click. I copy with the shortcut Control-C. I go into the totals worksheet, make sure my cursor's in cell A1, and paste it with the shortcut Control-V. I go back to my industry data worksheet, and then select total assets, Control-C, cell B1, Control-V, go back one more time, select my net income, column K, Control-C to copy, come to the total spreadsheet, cell C1, Control-V to paste. Now another way that I could have done with this, and you don't need to do it this way, but another way, just to show you a technique, when I need columns that are not consecutively aligned, I can come over to column B, hover over until my mouse becomes a black arrow, click on B, hold down the Control button, and come over, left click, column F, come over to column K, left click. While they're all selected, Control-C, find anywhere on your tab, on your totals page, Control-V. Either way works. Now what I want to do is, now that I have this data, I want to know what were total assets for all companies in year 2010. For the entire industry, or a 2-digit SIC code, how big was it in terms of assets? I want those sums for every company, for every year, for all companies within a year. This is where we need a pivot table. Really important step. Before we begin a pivot table, ensure that you've selected cell A2. This is the first piece of your data below the first header. While you've selected cell A2, you don't have to copy it, you don't have to click on anything. Just make sure that field is highlighted in green. We're going to come onto the Insert tab at the ribbon up above and select Pivot Table. You can see that all of the data is highlighted. I can check that if I want to by scrolling down to the bottom, making sure that everything is highlighted. That should happen automatically. I'm going to put my pivot table on this existing worksheet. So over on the Create Pivot Table, I'm going to choose Existing Worksheet, and instead of typing in a location, I'm going to click a nearby cell because I want my pivot table to be next to my data. That's all I have to do. Click one cell where that pivot table should start and hit OK. Now I've got the report where I can set up how do I want to display this information. There's different ways to do it. I'm going to set it up with my rows as years. So I clicked on F year, the variable name for year, and I dragged it down here. Let me do that one more time. I click on F year with a left click, and I drag it down to the field for rows. Now I get to tell Excel, what do I want? What information do I want related to those rows? One thing that I want is total assets. So in the pivot table fields, I click on Assets, and now I'm holding down my left click and I'm dragging down to the Values field. Mine has already automatically come up of sum of the variable AT, total assets. If you do not automatically have that happen, click on this drop down, choose Value Field Settings, and then if let's say you had been on Count, we would just change that to sum, hit OK. I'm going to do that one more time for the sum or total of net income so that I'm getting net income for all companies within this industry by year. Now I'm done, so I can close out this pivot table with this X right here. The formatting looks not so great, so I'm going to just select these cells that have the numbers, go to the Home tab. I'm going to choose this drop down here and make it number. Actually, no, I'm going to hit the comma sign. I'm going to take out the decimals, and that's a little bit easier for me to read. Here are our total assets over time. I can eyeball this information right here and look at total assets. How have they changed over time in this industry? Clearly, this industry is growing. And how is total net income for all companies by year? Remember, these numbers are in millions. Oh, it's growing quite a bit from 137 million in 2010 to 4.8 billion in 2018. But I want to see this data visually. The next video is going to generate some charts based on this data.